Hello everyone, thanks for coming back for the second part of this talk. This time will be more focused on the software layer. And spoiler alert, if you like Java, I'm sorry we did everything in Kotlin because I don't like Java, but that's fine. So, how many of you uses Google Photos on a daily basis? Well, a few. Okay, so let's get it started. Once more, I'm Roberto. I do Android stuff at the New York Times.
And I'm Daniele, again working on Android for Novoda.
Before starting, if you want to check out the project, it's on GitHub. We really appreciate any contribution, any advice, any issue that you can open. Not 100% sure that we will actually solve the issues, but you never know. So let's get started and let's see the high-level picture of what we're gonna build.
So, what is this project about? This project that we built together is an Android Things-based photo booth. So, as the name suggests, it's based on Android Things version in particular. And you can see a smaller version in the table up here. Of course, the complete version was way bigger, with a screen, a bigger monitor, a dedicated big button that the user can press. But the idea is the same as this one. The user could press a button, and that button would have the camera taking a picture. The picture was then displayed on a screen, the monitor, and saved and stored locally. Once we then had the internet connection, that picture was also uploaded on a Google Photos API, Google Photos album, which was shared with a lot of people, so that all those people could have a notification and watch the new taken picture. In our device, in our setting, internet, the connection was not really a problem because we were storing the pictures locally first, and we were then uploading them once we had a network connection. What was a bit more a problem was the authentication part of it. This is because Google Photos, in order for you to upload and also to query the user's album, needs the user to log in into their Google account. So to do so, usually on a phone you would just use some traditional APIs, but on a device like this one, or the one that we actually built, which didn't have any touchscreen, didn't have users already logged in the device, you could not use traditional usages. So what we did was instead to create a companion app, basically a mobile phone app where the user could log in with their account and then send the required data on the device. We will see that it was not that easy as you would expect. So the companion app looks like something like this. We didn't spend a lot of time in the design because it needed to be just functional for the scope. And the design was pretty simple. The UX was pretty simple. Could just allow the user to select one of the Google accounts present on the phone or log in to an additional one, take an access token and send it to the thing, actually. So how did we get that token that we needed to send to Android Thing device in order to upload the pictures? The first thing was to create the project in the Google backend and to get an out secret. That secret was then used with the Play Services, the Google Sign-in API, in order to get client. That one was basically, well, first we were creating these options, and then we were getting the email and an ID token, which is the one that we were going to use, and we need to specify some scopes. Google Photos introduced with their API 2 new scopes, which are the sharing one, which is, as you can imagine, to share, to add new pictures, and the read one, which is the one that is needed to query the user's albums. Then we were getting the client, which we could use in order to present to the user the dialog that allows them to select which account to use. This is the usual dialog that you will see when you log into any of the Google apps. Basically, you can see, okay, I have these Google accounts, I want to select this one, or just add a new one. Then we were getting, basically, from the intent that we created, we were getting a task, which was an asynchronous task, and we were getting the result once that one was completed. That task could also contain an exception, so we needed to be careful for that. And then once we get this account back, so once the task completed, we could process our account, sorry. But the account that we received was not yet the one that we wanted. So again, using another Google API, we could select the account containing this bundle, getting the token, and finally, after this one, we could process our token and send it to the actual device.
Okay, so the first problem was an easy one. But then we have the token in our app, but we need on that thing there. So we need a way to communicate in a reliable way to Android things. So we cannot really rely on connection on its own, or Bluetooth on its own, or anything else. So we actually went for, I think, the best solution we could find, and was leveraging them all. So we don't care which one is active, we just say, hey, there is something listening, just send the token over. And this thing was actually the nearby API. So it will leverage whatever connection it can find in order to send a payload. And this payload, in our case, will contain the token. So the first thing that we needed to do is actually implementing the message listener, actually extending the message listener, so that when we get our message, we could extract the content and create a string out of its bytes. Of course, we didn't account for any encryption or anything like that for two reasons. The first one, we were controlling the environment. We were pretty sure that nobody was sniffing anything there. And also it was an MVP. So it was a good trade-off. Once we create the listener, we actually have to listen for something. And, well, we do that with a specific component which is bound to the activity lifecycle, because you actually have to subscribe and unsubscribe from the message receiver, otherwise you're going to leak quite a lot of resources. So using the lifecycle owner and the lifecycle listeners, we could create a component that would automatically unsubscribe when the application was killed. Of course, on Android things, this is not really needed, because most of the times if the app is killed, that's because we unplug it. But there might be some situations that we could not foresee, so we decided to play it safe. And then we need to send something over. And what we do is simply taking our token, which is a string, convert it to a byte array, and setting as a content of the message. This message will then be sent over with the same mechanism that we use for receiving. So you have actually to publish the message, and it will keep on sending it until you unpublish it. So you have two components that have to be registered and unregistered when you're done. And this is quite important. So now we have the token on our Android thing, and we have to understand how to use the Google Photos API. Well, that was not the easiest task I've ever done, to be honest. There was quite a lot of complications, but let's see. So the first function that we wanted to create was something that will fetch all the albums of the given account and show it to the user. So, there are a few problems here. The first one is that you can only interact with something that you created from your app. So if you created an album, you could add pictures, you could rename it, but as soon as you go to Google Photos, rename it manually, then you lose ownership of this album. And we encountered this issue quite a lot of time. So, this is a normal retrofit function, so I suppose that every Android developer use retrofit for REST calls. What you have to send over is simply the authorization header, which contains not only the token, but also a standard prefix that we added earlier. But I mean, it's just a string. And there is the page token query. And this is actually pretty interesting. So, but let's first check the return type. We were using coroutines because for this project we tried to use the least amount of libraries that we could, and we decided to use coroutines. So if you didn't check them out, do that because they're amazing. I mean, you can literally write asynchronous code that looks synchronous without blocking anything, so it's amazing. So, those are the models that we relied on. So as you can see, we still have once more the query token. It's called the next page token, both here and in the function, because we actually need to have this token. Because since the results are paginated, we have to know where to go next. And of course, we have the album response, which contains the product URL, which is the URL that you have to use in order to connect to the Google Photos album, the ID, the title that you can decide, and the writable flag, which tells you if you can change it or not. So, here comes in place the next page token importance. What we do here in our fetch album function is actually first initializing the next page token to null. This is pretty important because when we do the call, we have to check for the next page token. And in particularly here, we have this extension function that we create in order to actually get the token itself. Why so? Well, because there was a slight problem with API. Since the next page token was marked as nullable, and there was no documentation about it, what I thought is that when you reach the last page, you would have a null token, or an empty token, right? This is what someone would expect. What if they actually send you the same token that you send over and you don't check? Yeah, you keep on making the same request because since it was marked as nullable, I was only checking if it was null. So what we do here is checking if the token is different from the one that we provided, then we continue doing the request. Otherwise, we'll set it as null so that our nullable logic keeps on working. And this actually was pretty complicated because, I mean, if you mark something as nullable, I expect it to be nullable, not anything else. But, well, we won that battle, so that's fine. But, hey, then we needed to upload an image. And, yeah, as you can see, we have two different API services here. Because, of course, you cannot do everything in one single pass. You have to first upload your picture to the storage, and then you create a media link between what you uploaded and the album. So you need two different services. And you need two different services because the upload service cannot rely on retrofit. So it cannot rely on retrofit because retrofit has some constraint that relates to the type of the request and the headers. So, long story short, we could not have an octet type with the kind of request that we were making. So, retrofit was overriding our content type to something else, and if the content type is not correctly matched on Google backend, then the call will fail. So we had to leverage the OK HTTP3 request body itself in order to make the call exactly as it was expected from the Google backend. Here again, for the last query, for the last image, the one that would create the media link. So we already have our image uploaded. This image will return a media link token, which is inside the image upload request. And with that token and the authorization one, you can ask the Photos API to create this link. But since there was this semicolon here, we had to add a point here so that retrofit will not interpret that as a variable. So it was kind of a hacky thing, but if you remove this point here, it's not going to work. And it's actually, I was surprised because I didn't know about this thing. It was actually documented in one issue on retrofit. And yeah, I'm now sure that I know a bit more about retrofit and I feel like a better developer. It won't last long, but yeah, for the moment it's okay. And at this point, we have our picture correctly uploaded on Google Photos. So it took us 20 minutes only to explain how we could upload a single picture to Photos. It took us way more to figure out the whole stuff because it was not documented yet. So, we learned a lot of things from this project. The first one is that your album will only show in the Google Photos app when it has at least one picture. So what happens is that I created 7 or 8 albums to test. I could see them in my test app, and when I opened Google Photos, there was nothing. Like, I had an empty account. So it took me a couple of tries to understand what's going wrong, because the APIs were telling me, hey, yeah, we created the album is here. Even trying on a different device with the same album, with the same account, sorry, I could get the albums back, but I couldn't see them in Photos until I uploaded at least one single picture. But from the API, you cannot delete those pictures. So once they're uploaded, you have to access from Google Photos in order to delete the picture. And of course, you can only interact with the albums that you created from your app. But as soon as you act on these albums on Google Photos, you may lose ownership of these albums, so you cannot really act on it anymore. And we discovered it in the hard way.
This one was a bit of a problem because, as you can imagine, we were collaborating, but we are not living close to each other. So we had to share the same Google account. We created one ad hoc for this because we needed to work on the same album and be able to create his part of the app, my part of the app, and both of them should have been able to interact with these pictures. And yeah, would have been good if you could collaborate. Also apps created with Google Photos API, like you always do when you create a shared album.
But, well, we manage after all. So, if you want to check something more about this project, there are quite a lot of things that you can check, specifically for Google Photos. The first one is the API. The second one is the Java library that they released right after we finished our project. It was based, of course, on the REST API. They released the Java client. So, well, we have to integrate it sometimes in the future. And of course, there are quite a lot of examples. This one specifically is not related to Android. It's a normal Java client. So you can use whatever you want, like on server-side or desktop or even Android. You just need to wrap it. But it's pure Java, so if you just want to test it out and see how it works, well, this is how. And I guess we are actually done. And now we have time for questions. And the slides are already online on speakers deck. So if you have any question, well, time to ask them. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are 3, 4.
Okay.
Okay. Why won't you use Dagger 2 to provide DI for retrofit? Well, did we use Dagger? I don't remember if we did. Was?
I think we did.
Yeah,
At least.
yeah, we just didn't show it because it was not part of the. It was not really important for this talk, but we usually use dependency injection a lot. So.
This one is mostly for you. What's the reason why we cannot delete a picture through the API?
That's a good question.
But yeah.
That's just there is not API. I mean.
Ask Google.
Yep. Ask not me. Okay. How did you validate your application libraries? Which technique approach was used? TDD or heavy testing for corner cases? Well, we wrote tests that since it was not really related to Android, it was unit testing. We didn't really have any UI, luckily, so that helped quite a lot because we didn't have to use Espresso. So yeah, we just did unit testing and mocking the responses from Google Photos.
Regarding, if I can add one thing, regarding testing and working on a library, usually something that is very helpful is to create in parallel the library and a module which is the sample app, which if the library is open source is good practice to release also a sample or a demo app. And building them together allows you to create the features in the library and test immediately through manual testing or integration testing that the feature is working on a real application.
How long did it take in total?
I think we started in July.
Yeah, a couple of months.
Couple of months, yeah. And we finished it at the beginning of September.
Why did you use Google Photos API instead of friendly Google Drive API? Yeah, mainly because Google Drive API wouldn't have gotten us to share the images directly in Google Photos. So the idea was to have the images already shared in a shared album for everyone. With the Google Drive API, we could have uploaded them and then hope that the synchronization would work exactly when we need it.
I mean, that one would have worked maybe because we could have created a shared Google Drive folder. But I'm thinking about older relatives, let's say. Like if I'm thinking about my mom, she doesn't know how to use Google Drive. So if I give her a link of a shared Google Drive folder, she's not going to be able to see the pictures. While Google Photos is very user-friendly for that, so people could see immediately the shared photos. Yeah, exactly. You don't need the app. You can just watch the shared albums also in the web version on mobile. Okay. Any more questions? So let's see.
Which was the best? We have 3, yeah. Best 3. We have 3 bags for winners.
The reason why? Yep. Okay. What's the reason why you cannot delete through the API? This is a very good one. It's for Google, but it's a very good one.
Can you invite to the stage for your prize? Let's applause, make some noise for this guy. Congratulations. Next one.
Next one is about how to validate application libraries. Techniques used. Who wrote this one?
Yeah. Let's invite us to the stage. It's applause yours. Congratulations. Next one.
And finally, I found interesting the question regarding the difference between Google Photos and the Google Drive API. Why we didn't use that one?
The prize is yours. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you very much, Daniele. Thank you very much, Roberto, for your interesting lection.